Hi, Rick Clark, fifth generation from Williamsport, Indiana. I am for the soil because if you want healthy humans, you have to have healthy soil. It all starts with the soil.
Here we go with another episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii. Mary Sketch Bryant will join us in just a few moments. Eric Benfelt is taking the week off. Well deserved. Enjoy some time off, Eric. You absolutely deserve it. But Mary will join us in just a few moments. Hey, just wanted to remind everyone about the special event coming up on Saturday evening, October the 25th. It is the Virginia Farm to Table Feast and Harvest Celebration. All of the food served will be produced right here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Great entertainment, excellent discussion, lots of displays, exhibits. It's going to be on a historic farm, Sunny Slope Farm in Rockingham County, Virginia. That's in the community of Dayton, and that is where the modern turkey industry started over 100 years ago. It's going to be a great evening, Saturday, October the 25th. Get all the details at the website virginiafarmtotable.org. That is virginiafarmtotable.org, and we'll see you there. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, and joining me today, Mary Sketch Bryant with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Dr. Eric Benfelt with Virginia Cooperative Extension is on vacation this week. We hope he has a great time. I understand, Mary, that he is somewhere west of the Mississippi River. I don't know where, but I'm sure he'll have a lot of stories when he comes back.
I think he's out in Washington State, so beautiful area, and we'll look forward
Oh,
to
yeah.
hearing from him.
Well, that's way out west. Well, we have a special guest joining us for this episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. Mary, would you do the introduction, please?
Thanks, Jeff. Really excited to have Dr. Ashley Jernigan with us. Dr. Jernigan is a assistant professor of organic and sustainable vegetable crops production at Virginia Tech, an agroecologist really interested in connecting sustainable practices and the crop systems, looking at soil biological processes. And prior to being at Virginia Tech, she was at Cornell, where she got her PhD in entomology, which I'm sure this is not the right way to say it, but I say the study of bugs, which is not, that's the layman's terms maybe, but we're excited to dig a little more into that as well. So thank you for being with us, Dr. Jernigan. And I guess to start, would love to just hear a little bit about how did you get into this field of work? How did you get interested in soil biological processes?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity and invitation. My journey into soils was a little non-traditional. I grew up always playing outside. I would dig giant holes. I was making my own soil pits when I was like a 7-year-old out in the yard. I
Really?
hit water one time, which terrified my mother. But so I've always been fascinated with the soil. I'd say what really got me interested in potentially pursuing it as a career path was the National FFA organization and their career development events. I was fortunate to have a really strong FFA chapter at my high school, and I was able to participate in a number of different CDEs or career development events that the organization offers. And land judging was by far my favorite. I loved getting to go out to different farms and just look at the different soil pits and learn about the different horizons and activity. And that experience with the FFA really trajected me into studying agriculture with a focus on soil science in my undergrad.
That doesn't surprise me to hear that you were involved with FFA as a teenager. We've had a lot of our guests that were even chapter officers or even state officers in the FFA organization. And that organization is so good at developing leadership skills. People think it's all about agriculture, but it's a lot about leadership. Tell us about the place that you work at Virginia Tech. I understand it's specifically the Sustainable and Organic Vegetable Crops Production Lab. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I am very fortunate to fill a new position within the School of Plant and Environmental Sciences. historically the manager of Homefield Farm, which is a research farm outside of Blacksburg, focused on vegetable production, had also been charged with teaching the sustainable agriculture class. And what they chose to do back, I guess, probably around 2022 is when they made these decisions, but they decided to split that farm management position into its own staff position. So we now have a new farm manager out there, and they made a new assistant professor faculty position, which is my role. And in my position, I have 60% research, 30% teaching, and 10% service. So I get to teach the sustainable agriculture class now, as well as the vegetable cropping systems course. In terms of my research, since it is a new position, I get the luxury of carving out my own little niche within the department. And the topic of sustainable and organic vegetable crops production is really broad and diverse. I think it was the perfect position for me because of my diverse experiences working in not only, of course, general agriculture, soil science, but also weed science, plant pathology, entomology. I really get to take this systems level perspective to managing vegetable crops here in Virginia.
And Dr. Jernigan, the part of that is organic production. And we know that's kind of a buzzword and especially, has been for a while because it has that certification component around it. Where, if we're thinking soil health, where do you see them, organic agriculture and soil health, really aligned? And are there challenges of that types of production in soil health?
That is a perfect question. I get asked that a lot by growers and just general people that I'm talking to about my job. What the National Organic Program is focused on is really about restricting external inputs that are chemical based. Obviously, there is the goal within organic systems to hopefully promote soil health, but the certification process through the USDA is not necessarily as focused on that. So I follow organic practices so that any grower that is organic certified through the National Organic Program can utilize my research and that knowledge. But I am very fortunate that Virginia actually has a lot of smaller scale vegetable growers that may not be organic certified, but are using organic and sustainable practices that are improving their soil health and helping to regenerate some of these really worn out soils in certain parts of the state. So there's also other types of certification that are gaining a lot of traction, like certified naturally grown, which is a peer-based certification process. Again, still following those general organic standards that you would think of, but with more emphasis actually on how it's affecting the ecosystem as a whole, especially the soil and soil health.
You mentioned organic and sustainable practices. Name some of those.
Yeah, well, I think everybody immediately goes to keeping the soil covered. So, always having those living roots, cover crops if you're not actively growing a cash crop, trying to minimize those open inner row spaces in your fields that can potentially have erosion impacts, and also ensuring that there's a minimization of soil disturbance, whether that's tillage or manual weeding, depending on the scales you're talking about and how you're managing those aspects, are the two main things that come to mind. But I think there's a lot of other ways that we can improve sustainability and sustainable practices beyond just reducing disturbance and keeping the soil covered. What we really want to do is also improve biodiversity. And I really focus on promoting feeding the soil to feed your plants and really thinking of it as this closed loop system that's constantly cycling nutrients.
Absolutely. And you talked about that minimizing disturbance. And in an organic system, you get this, you're minimizing maybe that chemical disturbance, but it can be challenging to minimize the physical disturbance with tillage, because you're having that weed management. Are you seeing, is there new innovation around how to minimize some of that physical disturbance in organic systems?
Yes, definitely. And that's one of the aspects of the organic certification that I'm always like, oh yeah, no, it's great to minimize chemicals, but in a lot of ways you're forced to utilize physical cultivation to control your weeds. That's a huge challenge. What I'm really excited about is the direction the precision ag is heading and how we're really able to pinpoint the locations and fields where we are causing that disturbance. And that's one area of my research that I'm very excited about and that's currently developing. I think if we can gain a better understanding of the spatial dynamics regarding those interactions between different soil organisms and biota, then we may be able to utilize this precision agriculture technology in the future to better manipulate the biological interactions to hopefully control weeds in a way that's still minimizing the soil, but getting the weed control you need.
Soil organisms. How do we measure if our soil is alive and healthy?
There are a lot of ways that we can do that now. What I actually prefer is to not directly assess soil organism communities. I do in my research, obviously, because that's an important factor. But from a grower perspective, what I think is really important is to measure the results of that biological activity. So, my two top soil health indicators that I always recommend are going to be soil aggregate stability and then soil organic matter in some capacity. There are a lot of different
So
ways that we can measure.
a backyard vegetable gardener, how do they do that?
Well, I can take you right back to soil judging with the FFA with that, right? If you were to take a trowel and just dig in a shovel about, let's say, 6 inches deep, it really doesn't need to be very specific if you're just a gardener trying to get an assessment of is my practice improving the soil health. But we can talk about the tilth or how is that structure? Is it falling apart and being dusty in your hand? Because that means you're not having microbial activity that's kind of gluing those aggregates together through fungal hyphae and bacterial biofilms. If you have these nice friable, larger aggregate sizes, if you can see those little clumps that are, a centimeter thick, that's wonderful. And that's an easy assessment that anyone can do.
We're talking today with Ashley Jernigan. She is assistant professor at Virginia Tech, specifically at the Sustainable and Organic Vegetable Crops Production Lab. And we've got about 3 or 4 minutes remaining in this episode, Ashley, and I wanted to talk about the biology of the soil and emphasize to our listeners that the soil is alive. I'm presuming that you've heard of the Soil Your Undies challenge.
Of course.
Okay, tell us your version of it.
Oh, well, honestly, I think over the last several decades, as soil health has gained traction, there's been a lot of great outreach exercises and activities like Soil Your Undies that show that the organisms in the soil are decomposing these organic materials, right? So you want your underwear that you're decomposing to be cotton. But one fun thing that I like to do in the field of soil ecology, we can measure feeding activity through this really simple tool called bait lamina strips. And you can make them yourself actually as a home grower or, anyone. But those little plant tags that you can label your pots with the little
Yeah.
plastic sticks? Yeah, everyone's fairly familiar with those. What you can do is punch little holes in them and then fill it with a bait, right? That's why it's called a bait trap, right? The bait lamina part of it. And usually you're making some sort of paste with water, ground oatmeal. Some people use like bran cereals, and you fill up the little holes at the different depths on your strip, stick it in the soil, and then after a set amount of time, let's say 24 hours for this example, you can see the feeding activity just based on the visual observation of, oh, which holes are empty now or have been fed on. And as a home gardener, someone on a small scale, that's a fun, easy activity to be like, okay, I changed this practice on this one section of my garden, and I did my bait lamina strips in both sections, comparing the practice versus not the practice that I'm implementing. How has this changed? How is that direct measure of activity and feeding activity of the soil organisms different?
I know we're closing in here on the end of this episode, but we always love to ask folks what some of the resources, what are some of your favorite resources that you're learning from or that you would suggest producers, backyard gardeners, learn from around this work?
I think as a soil ecologist, what I am really always encouraging people to do is making sure that they're going to reputable sources, right? When you're talking about microbes or anything that you can't directly observe, there can be some misinformation out there. So going to your local extension agents and the resources that they're putting out, your land grant universities, the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service through the USDA, those are your go-to places. Specifically in my field of work, I'm focused on soil microarthropods, primarily springtails and mites. And there is this wonderful macro photographer, Andy Murray from the UK, that I adore his work. And he has this wonderful website called achaosofdelight.com. And he breaks down all of the information about soil mesofauna, which is the size category of soil organisms, and along with this great information that is really accessible to any, high school reading level or above. He has beautiful pictures. I could stare at his art all day. Definitely worth checking out his website.
I'm glad you mentioned that website. I just punched it in and bam, chaosofdelight.org, chaosofdelight.org, and I'm going to investigate that and take a look at some of those pictures. Unfortunately, our time is already up. Can you believe it? For this episode, would you be willing to stay with us for another episode?
Of course.
All
I apologize for being a little talkative.
No. That's all right.
Not
Our
at
guest
all.
in this segment, Dr. Ashley Jernigan, assistant professor at Virginia Tech in the Sustainable and Organic Vegetable Crops Production Lab. And thank you for joining us. We'll see you in the next episode. And Mary, we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, Jeff and Ashley.
And another quick reminder about the Virginia Farm to Table Harvest Celebration coming up on Saturday, October the 25th in Dayton, Virginia. All the details can be found at the website virginiafarmtotable.org. That's virginiafarmtotable.org. For the Soil, a Conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. If you have a specific question about soil health, just call your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of the Flip Charts, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a Conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.